Thank you for joining us for today's Solution Spotlight. Our CEA Solution Spotlights are casual conversations with the CEA team and our suppliers to address common questions and situations that come up in CEA production and cultivation. Today, we will be discussing iron and magnesium deficiencies. We'll touch on diagnosis and mitigation, how to solve the problem if you have one of these deficiencies. We're happy to welcome both Leah Vanderhyde from BASF and Dan Gillespie from J.R. Peters. On the Griffin side, we have Rebecca Beruli and Erica Hernandez. Rebecca, how about you kick us off?
Thanks, Tammy, for the introduction. Nutrient deficiencies can seem mysterious to growers. How do they happen? How can you tell which nutrients is at fault? Is it easy or hard to correct nutritional deficiencies? Since there are so many plant nutrients, we'll focus today on just two that can commonly be lacking, iron and magnesium. Erica, let's start with some background information. How do we know when our plants are suffering from nutrient deficiencies?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. So there's a couple of different warning signs that we might want to look out for. The first and the easiest to spot are often changes in color to our plant. And most of the time, this is going to show up as chlorosis or a yellowing of the leaves. And chlorosis can take a couple different forms. Sometimes it appears as interveinal, which means it would start between the veins on the leaves. Other times it can be sort of an even yellowing across the leaf as a whole, and other times it can work sort of from the outside or the margins in. So this yellowing, it can start in different areas of the plant as well. Sometimes it can start at the top, or it might even start at the bottom. Sometimes you might see that it's happening all over all at once. So that's one of the important things we want to note. It's where you first start seeing these symptoms. Inspecting your plants daily, it can help you notice these subtle changes before they become big issues.
So why is it so important to look at where deficiency symptoms show up on the plant?
Yeah, so I did mention it's important to note location. This is because nutrients are considered either mobile or immobile. So immobile nutrients tend to stay where they are in the plant once they've been absorbed. So a deficiency of an immobile nutrient is probably going to appear in the newest growth first. On the other hand, we've got mobile nutrients, which can be remobilized from older growth, and they can be put into new growth. When this happens, we're basically breaking down plant materials that might contain that nutrient from our older growth and just shooting them up into the newly developed areas. This tends to leave old growth with deficiency symptoms for those nutrients. These are the types of clues we're going to want to use when we're trying to decide which is the nutrient that we're having the most issue with.
Interesting. So I've heard growers talk about lockout. What is that?
Well, lockout is a really broad term, and typically it means that something is either affecting the plant's ability to uptake nutrients or it's affecting the availability of the nutrients themselves. Incorrect pH is one of the really common starting places that we want to look. This can have an impact on multiple nutrients. Most plants have a preferred pH range, which means they're going to be most comfortable somewhere like 5.5 to 6 or 5.8 to 6.2, like that sort of range. And when the fertilizer solution or your media has a pH in that range, our nutrients are going to be most available to the plant there. So when we get outside of those ranges, we'll start to see things like plants not being able to absorb enough of some nutrients, or possibly even absorbing too much of some other ones. So pH is a big factor. Sometimes growers can also mix incompatible nutrients together in stock tanks. This is another big cause of lockout. What happens when this is the case is that nutrients will be interacting with each other in really highly concentrated forms. And if they're incompatible, what happens is they'll form solids or they'll precipitate out of solution. And these forms of the nutrients are typically just harder for plants to absorb, and solids are also likely to settle to the bottom of stock tanks. If this happens, those nutrients are never even going to get the chance to get into the growing media.
Thanks, Erica, for that quick background. Let's narrow our focus a bit more just to one nutrient. Leah, can you tell us more about iron? What role does iron play in plant development?
Thanks, Rebecca. Iron plays a key role in the manufacturing of chlorophyll. And as you guys know, chlorophyll is involved in photosynthesis and responsible for the green color. So that's commonly why we see iron deficiencies showing up as chlorosis. You see yellowing. It's because that plant cannot manufacture chlorophyll without having available iron. It's also involved in many different physiological processes and developments of proteins and enzyme, and it is an essential nutrient.
Thanks for that information. So what does an iron deficiency typically look like in a plant?
Okay, typical iron deficiency will start at the top of the plant. So you will actually notice the younger leaves closer to the tip develop a yellowing. And this yellowing is really specific to iron. It's one of the more easier deficiencies to identify because it's such a unique chlorosis. It's interveinal chlorosis, which means the veins remain green and the rest of the leaf tissue turns yellow. Eventually, if iron deficiency gets so advanced and so severe, the whole leaf can turn yellow.
Are some plants more susceptible to iron deficiencies than others? What about cannabis?
Absolutely. You will have some plants like petunias or calibrachoas that are more susceptible to iron deficiencies. And you'll have other plants that maybe can take a little bit lower iron concentrations. Cannabis is absolutely one of those crops that does get iron deficiency. And it is absolutely a nutrient that should be paid close attention to if you are growing cannabis.
So what factors lead to iron deficiency?
Factors that lead to an iron deficiency, I believe, start with the root system. Iron is taken up by the plant in a more complex way than other nutrients, and it's really, really dependent on having good, dense roots that are healthy, white tips, no diseases, really spread out because the plant roots only take up iron at a specific part in the plant, or in the roots, so right above the root tip. Root development is key. If you've seen iron deficient plants or any sort of yellowing plant or plant that's not doing well within an entire block of plants that might look healthy, the first thing you want to do is check your roots, because you can have iron there in the soil, available iron in the soil, perfect pH, but the plant isn't going to take it up if it doesn't have an established root system. So number one, care for your roots. Number two factor, the biggest factor of them all, is of course the pH of your substrate. The higher the pH, the less available form of iron is in the soil. So as your pH rises, available iron decreases in your soil. So the plant is not able to uptake this iron. You might have iron in the soil and you might be applying a fertilizer that has iron in it, but you're not seeing any greening up or reverse symptoms because the pH levels of that substrate breaks down or changes it into the oxide form of iron, which is not available for plant uptake.
That's great information. What can growers do to fix an iron deficiency?
Well, as I said, check your roots, ensure healthy roots, white root tips, make sure your plants are growing in the conditions that make them happy. Apply a fertilizer that contains, ammonium or an acidic type of fertilizer to bring down that pH. And of course, you can always add iron, apply iron as a foliar spray or as a substrate drench in order to really add that extra iron that's available for plant uptake, as long as those other factors, pH and roots, are taken care of.
So what kinds of products usually have some iron in them, if not specific iron supplements?
A lot of fertilizers will have iron in their mix. Look at the label, look at what you're applying. A lot of chelated iron also has different forms. So look at the percentage of chelated iron on that product. It's really important to look at the label and actually see what you're applying, because most of the time you're going to have sufficient iron, but something like cannabis, you're going to need to add a supplement, and those will easily done in a powder form, liquid form of iron chelate, such as Sprint, iron chelate Sprint 138, and that will provide the iron that you need for a fast green up or for just a quick fix or for maintenance. But fertilizer and iron are really what you're going to go to.
Great. It sounds like growers have some good tools in their pockets to identify and fix issues with iron nutrition. Different nutrients can sometimes have similar symptoms when deficiencies occur. Magnesium comes to mind as a common deficiency. Dan, can you tell us a bit more about magnesium?
I sure can. Thank you, Rebecca. So magnesium is an essential plant nutrient, and as all essential plant nutrients, is a very important plant nutrient. So magnesium is the central component of the chlorophyll, and it is also a metal activator for many of the enzymes that are involved in photosynthesis, respiration, and the formation of DNA and RNA.
All right, so what symptoms are we typically looking for when magnesium deficiencies show up?
Good question. So magnesium deficiency begins on the mature foliage of the plant. And this is because magnesium is a mobile plant nutrient. So as Erica mentioned, mobile plant nutrients can be translocated from the older plant tissue to the areas of higher demand, such as the new growth. So the plant is pulling magnesium from these older leaves and translocating it to the new growth where the demand is higher. So visual symptoms of magnesium deficiency include interveinal chlorosis that eventually leads to necrotic spots on plant leaves. This is the degradation of the chlorophyll. And this is shown in the picture here with magnesium deficiency in tomato.
So are some plants more susceptible to magnesium deficiencies? Why or why not?
Yeah, so some plants such as geraniums, and it seems cannabis is similar to this, are fairly heavy magnesium feeders and do require elevated levels of magnesium to maximize growth and yield.
So what factors can lead to magnesium deficiency?
So in many cases, magnesium deficiency can occur if it is not accounted for in the fertility program, or if other cationic nutrients such as calcium or potassium are not applied in the correct ratios, or over-applied, which can cause magnesium uptake to be inhibited. pH is not a typical cause of magnesium deficiency, but magnesium availability can be reduced in highly acidic and basic conditions.
Where do we see magnesium deficiencies most frequently?
Most frequently, you'll see the magnesium deficiencies occur if nutrients are not applied at the correct ratio. So if other cationic nutrients like calcium and potassium are over-applied, this can cause cationic competition for uptake through the plant roots and can inhibit magnesium uptake.
So what can growers do to fix the magnesium deficiency?
Sure. So if a grower does experience a magnesium deficiency, it can be corrected. So there are several different sources of magnesium. We have magnesium sulfate, which is known as Epsom salts, magnesium nitrate, and magnesium sulfate anhydrous. However, in many cases, Epsom salt is going to be the preferred source to correct a magnesium deficiency.
So Epsom salt, I thought that was for baths. Why do we use Epsom salts for magnesium?
Yeah. So Epsom salts are used to correct magnesium deficiency because it's a very soluble and very available source of magnesium. So it can be very quick acting corrective measure for magnesium deficiencies.
So are all Epsom salts the same?
No, so you want to ensure that you're using a technical or greenhouse grade of Epsom salts to ensure the maximum solubility and availability to the plant.
Thanks, Dan. That's really interesting. I feel like we've given growers some practical advice here today. If any viewers have any questions about what they've seen or would like to find out more about the products mentioned today, feel free to reach out to your Griffin rep or call us directly. We can be reached at 800-888-0054, extension 89199, or you can email us at cea@griffinmail.com. Thank you all for helping with this today.